History is not only what is written down, but also what is forgotten. Walls without tool marks, cities without names, symbols that were not a code, and yet remained misunderstood. We were taught to trace the path from stone to empire, but some things were left out, either deliberately or because there was no one else to remember. There are 25 stories in these 2 hours. They don't require faith, just attention. Maybe you'll fall asleep listening to them, or maybe the opposite, and suddenly you'll realize that someone was already here, before you, and left only a trace. The pyramid hidden beneath the ice. In eastern Antarctica, beyond the Prince Charles Ridge, lies an area that rarely comes to the attention of researchers. There are no stations, no logistics points, just ice and a constant wind. But in this area, on a satellite image from 2012, one feature caught my attention. It had not been noted before, not on maps from the British expeditions, not in the databases of scientific missions. And yet it was there, in a photograph taken on a clear day, at an angle that cast a clear shadow. The shape of the object resembled a pyramid, not in a symbolic sense, in a geometric sense. Smooth slopes, equal sides, a clear angle between planes. The height, according to calculations based on the shadow, is about 140 meters. The base is almost square. Everything is too correct not to be recorded, and too unexpected to explain. The first reaction was a shooting error, a satellite artifact, overlapping layers, the angle of incidence of light. But repeated frames taken from other satellites in other seasons showed the same shape. Then another hypothesis appeared. Hidden under the ice is a peak of rock, worn down by time, snow, and erosion. This is possible. The landscape of Antarctica keeps many irregularities. But there is one peculiarity. There is nothing near this object. Usually ice mountain forms are formed in groups. Relief rises, ridges, faults. Here is a solitary form, separate, as if placed, as if having a meaning, not geological, but something else. Access to the area is impossible by land. Moving on ice requires approval, permission, and huge costs. There have been no scientific missions to the area, only satellite observations. They lasted for 5 years. The shape of the object has not changed. The slopes retain their geometry. The snow is blown away by the wind. The ice does not grow at the usual rate. This raises a separate question. Why is the object almost clean? One theory suggests a warm anomaly beneath the surface. It could be a subglacial heat source, a geothermal vent, a rare heat transfer zone, possibly. But no traces of such processes have been registered nearby, no fracture, no evaporation, only pure ice in the correct shape. Analysis of geodetic maps showed that the object is located almost exactly on one of the old measurement lines used in ancient times, the so-called geodynamic orientations. They link the buildings in Egypt, Mesoamerica, and some points in Asia. This is speculation, but the coincidence is recorded. Several research groups not affiliated with academic structures suggested that the shape is unnatural, that it is not geology, that it is a structure hidden under the ice. A pyramid, not symbolic but literal, a construction, made long before the ice sheet, long before history. Scientifically, this is impossible. There are no traces of ancient civilizations in Antarctica, no ceramic fragments, no organic remains, no traces of life. The region's climate became hostile too long ago, according to official data, more than 1 million years ago. But then the question remains, how to explain single symmetry? Some point to other examples. In Bosnia, for example, the so-called Pyramid of the Sun was also written off as a natural hill until research began. In Greenland, there are formations that repeat the triangular shape, but everywhere there is a group, a bundle, a relief. Here there is one, ideal, as if standing separately, as if in its place. There is no evidence that this is a man-made structure, and no evidence that this is just an ice peak, just a shape, just a shadow, just coordinates that return over and over, a geometry that is not characteristic of random terrain. Maybe it's an optical illusion, maybe it's just ice, but maybe it's something that was left behind when everything else went under, something that didn't fit in with the rest of the geology, because it doesn't belong. We don't know what's beneath the surface. We don't know who was there, if anyone was. We only know that on a white, smooth, uninhabited plateau, there's a shape, which we call a pyramid, because it resembles nothing else. The empire that burned before it was named. Traces of a large settlement were discovered more than a century ago in the Karakum Desert, in what is now Turkmenistan. At the time, it was of no interest. The site was poorly accessible, sand covered most of the foundations, and the climate was hostile. Archaeologists attributed the find to one of the many transit points of ancient trade routes, nothing more. But in the 1960s, everything changed. An expedition led by Soviet archaeologist Viktor Sarianidi began full-scale excavations in the Gonur Deep area, and layer after layer, not a station began to open up, not a parking lot, but a center. Remains of a palace were found, multi-level walls, temples, a system of canals, metalworking, grain storage facilities, tools, treasure hoards, sacrificial sites. None of this was temporary. It was a complex, stable structure, a kind of city-state designed according to all the signs of civilization. The central part is the Acropolis, protected with regulated access. The layout is regular, that is not chaotic as in post-nomadic settlements, but calculated. This is no longer just a settled state. This is order. Later, tombs began to be found, stone sarcophagi, vessels with ashes, jewelry made of lapis lazuli, turquoise, silver. Everything points to a stable social structure, castes, specialization, distribution of power, and all this is several centuries earlier than the beginning of the known history of the region. But the main question is not what was found, it is what was not found. This city had no name. No tablets, no inscriptions, no chronologies, no mentions in the annals of neighboring civilizations. Not in Sumerian sources, not in Persian chronicles, not in the archives of India or China. Complete emptiness. And yet, it was a state. It existed. More than 30,000 square meters of fortifications. More than 1,000 burials. Traces of export and import. Trademarks. Traces of fire. Traces of restoration after the fire. But not a single written sign by which its name could be recorded. Later, hypotheses began to appear. Some researchers began to call this phenomenon a country without a voice. It built, it ritualized, it buried, it kept records, but it did not speak. Others, on the contrary, assumed that the voice was there, but erased, destroyed, perhaps as a result of destruction, perhaps intentionally, perhaps by the system itself. Another feature, when the system began to collapse, it happened quickly. In the layers you can see fire, abandoned objects, half-ruined buildings. After that, silence, sand, no signs of restoration, no signs of return, as if everything that was here was not meant to continue. Sarianidi called this complex the Margiana civilization. The name is conditional. We came up with it. The people who lived there did not call themselves that. We do not know what they called themselves, because only the form remains, only the lines of the walls, places for fire, the contours of grain storage facilities, and not a single name. This is not the only such case. There are many nameless civilizations in history, but almost all of them are short, fragmentary, and here, stability, scale, architecture in which knowledge is visible. And disappearance, without transition, without merging, without mention in those who came after. Maybe it was a society that didn't need writing. Maybe it was a culture that lived by oral transmission. Or maybe they didn't have time to invent it. Or maybe they deliberately avoided it. But then the question arises, how did an organization of this level arise without fixed accounting systems, without a language that remains, or was it there, but in a different form, symbolic, spatial, auditory? Now all that remains of this empire are the smooth outlines of the walls, the shadows of the columns, and the dry wind that blows the sand from the laid slabs, and the feeling that you are not standing in front of ruins, but in front of the outline of a memory that no one has preserved. The machine that doesn't fit the timeline? In 1900, a group of Greek divers looking for sponges in the Aegean Sea came across a shipwreck off the island of Antikythera. It lay at a depth of about 40 meters and immediately attracted attention. Among the amphorae and statues typical of ancient merchant ships, they found a fragment that, at first glance, had no relation to the other finds. It was a piece of bronze, irregular, covered in deposits with barely noticeable jagged edges. It was attributed to decorative elements, but later, upon repeated cleaning and examination, it turned out to be part of a mechanism. The fragment was later named the Antikythera mechanism. It consisted of gears, cogwheels, axles, and dials. Everything was assembled into a single system designed for complex movement. The first models already showed that it was an analog computing device. Inside were 37 bronze gears capable of synchronizedly displaying the movement of celestial bodies, solar and lunar cycles, eclipses, and even astronomical phases. Initially, it was dated to the 1st century BC. This dating is still maintained today. But the problem is different. The time to which the find belongs does not suggest the existence of such devices. There is no evidence of such mechanisms either among the Greeks or the Romans. Not in literature, not in engineering treatises, not in temples, not in craft workshops. The mechanism works on the differential principle, which allows calculating the movement of bodies depending on speed and position. This principle is considered an invention of the 16th century. The development of gear transmissions with such precision is even later. The gears have teeth cut to precise curvilinear geometry. This requires not just knowledge, but tools, templates, metalworking at a level unavailable at the time. But the mechanism was assembled, not theoretically, not schematically, but literally. It existed. It worked. Reconstructions made in the 21st century showed that the device was placed in a box that could be opened. Inside was a handle that could be rotated to track the position of the sun, moon, and stars. There were also inscriptions inside, instructions. They were written in Greek script. This is not a fake. This is not an alien object. This is a thing made by human hands. But how? Why has nothing like this been found, either before or after? Supporters of alternative versions suggest that the mechanism is a unique artifact, preserved from an earlier, now lost engineering tradition. Perhaps a copy, perhaps a reconstruction from someone else's descriptions. But then another question arises. Why is there not even a hint anywhere else? It is not known who the author was. No signatures, no names, only calculations, diagrams, engravings, as if the creator did not demand recognition, or created to order. Some suggest that the mechanism was ritualistic, that its precision was a side effect of aesthetics. But an analysis of the mechanics shows that precision was a necessity. Every gear in its place, every gear calculated. It is function, not form. Perhaps this device was part of an educational system, a demonstration of cosmic order. But if so, why such a level of complexity? Why not a wooden model, but an engineering tool comparable in complexity to a Renaissance clock? It may have been an artifact passed down from an earlier period, or perhaps a random technological advance that arose locally and disappeared along with those who created it. After the ship sank, the device ended up underwater in ideal conservation conditions. It was saved by chance. Without it, we would not know about its existence. And this raises another question. How many more such devices were there, but did not survive? Today, the mechanism is kept in the National Archaeological Museum of Athens. It has been studied, scanned, reproduced. But even the most accurate reconstructions cannot explain its context. It does not fit. Not as a technology, not as an idea, not as a necessity. This is a machine that shouldn't exist, but it does, and what's left of it is not theory, but metal and a rotating wheel. The tomb that couldn't be opened, but screamed when touched. In 1977, a team of archaeologists from the Italian Institute of Oriental Research arrived to excavate the Al-Ule Valley in northwestern Saudi Arabia. The area is known as part of the ancient Nabatean route and contains dozens of tombs, temples, and rock-cut niches, many of which remain unexplored. Most of the sites in this area date to the 1st century BCE. They are well documented and generally classifiable, but one site, designated Tomb 32K, has been a source of concern from the start. It was located above the main rock mass, on a ledge where there were no other structures. There were no stairs leading up to it. The entrance to the tomb was rectangular, cut into the stone wall. There were no symbols or inscriptions around, only a smooth surface, and a shadow hiding the opening. When the team tried to enter, they found that the door wouldn't open. The rock wasn't sealed, wasn't locked. It just wouldn't budge. No cracks, no mechanical locks. The door seemed to be part of a solid rock, although it was visually outlined. After several unsuccessful attempts to get inside, it was decided to conduct acoustic diagnostics. When the device touched the surface of the door, an effect occurred that would later be described as a single acoustic emission, not a sound, not a crack, but a vibrational resonance, brief and focused. It was heard by everyone who was nearby, not as an echo, not as a tremor, as a sound that did not come from the object, but passed through it. Analysis of the recording showed the signal frequency is unstable. It started as infrasound, passed into the audible range, and suddenly disappeared. Duration is less than 1 second. The source is not detected. After that, the door remained in place. It did not collapse. It did not change, but no one tried to open it again. A year later, as part of the expansion of the excavations, they returned to the site. The surface of the opening remained untouched, but now, nearby, at a distance of 3 meters, A crack has formed in the rock. No traces of a blow, no crumbling, just a line going deep into the massif. Inside it is a void. Acoustic scanning revealed that there is a cavity behind it. The attempt to reach the cavity was unsuccessful. The instrument stopped working. The electronics went out. The light went out. The only thing that remained was the feeling of pressure. It was as if the air had become denser. Neither the instruments nor the recordings registered a threat. But subjectively, all participants described anxiety, difficulty breathing, a strange awareness that something was inside, without form, without movement, but with a presence. There were no more sounds, only that same recording made on the first day. Analysis showed that the structure of the sound wave contains unusual overtones. It is not repeated in any known sample. But there is a coincidence, a partial similarity with the acoustic effects that occur in stone chambers with a certain volume proportion. This means that the tomb can be arranged as a resonator. If so, then the sound that arose when touching is not a coincidence. This is the answer. The locals do not talk about the tomb. It is not included in the traditional routes. They do not talk about it, not in legends, not in retellings. It is simply a place that people do not go to, not because it is forbidden, but because there is nothing there. But the door does exist. The shape is correct. The height is a little over 2 meters. The width is standard. Everything suggests that there is a chamber behind it, but it cannot be opened. In any way. Not mechanically. Not by destruction. Not bypassing. Archaeologists have stopped trying. The object is fixed. Research is suspended. In the reports, it is marked as unopenable, no access. Recommendation: do not touch. Skeptics think it's a coincidence, a geological feature, a rock that took the shape of an opening, possibly. But then, where did the sound wave come from? If it is not a door, then why the form? If it is not a tomb, then why the platform? If it is not a chamber, then why the vibration? Sometimes things don't open, not because they're locked, but because they don't want to be opened. And maybe what came out then wasn't a voice, but a warning. The stone that recorded a skyquake. In the northern part of Bolivia, near Lake Titicaca, archaeologists in 1982 explored the territory where the fortifications of the ancient city of Tiwanaku once stood. This region is considered the center of a civilization that existed long before the Incas. Most of the buildings are destroyed. Only platforms, fragments of walls, and leveled areas remain in places, lined with slabs polished by time. One of these areas was on the edge of the main complex, a leveled plateau of gray andesite, a stone difficult to process. One of the slabs was different. It was about 3 meters long. The surface was smooth, but with a barely noticeable structure reminiscent of a punched grid. No one could explain its purpose. It contained no inscriptions, only a grid relief, clear angles, intersecting lines, uniform indents. The study showed that the structure of the grid repeated the celestial sphere. The corners corresponded to the positions of large stars and constellations, but one of the fields was out of place. Where there should have been empty cells, there were concentric lines, almost like sound waves. The center is a point. Arcs radiate from it, 5, in a uniform radius. The locals said that this place is called the stone that heard thunder. Not lightning, not an earthquake, but the sky. There is a word in their language that means the unexpected breath of thunder from above. No wind, no rain, just sound. There is no official data on such an event. But in the archive of the missionaries of the 17th century, a brief mention was found that in the year 17 from the Catholic entrance, the sky over Tiwanaku thundered without clouds. People hid under the walls, but the earth did not tremble. The date is not determined precisely, but confirmation exists. When the stone was acoustically tested, it turned out that at a certain frequency it reproduces sound. Not in the sense of playing, but resonates, creating a vibration that is captured by devices as infrasound. Not loud, not constant, but distinguishable. The relief shape amplifies the sound if you bring a source to the center, even a weak one. Whistle, whisper, air, everything becomes directed and begins to vibrate the plane. This is impossible on a random surface, only if it is designed as a resonant matrix. According to legend, the stone was carved to commemorate an event, not as a tombstone, but as a record of an event, not an image, not a myth, but a mechanical attempt to reproduce the moment. What a skyquake is still unclear. Such phenomena are registered in different places on Earth, sometimes as a dull explosion, sometimes as a growing howl, always without a source. No earthquake, no sound barrier, no atmospheric deviations. In the case of Tiwanaku, if it happened, it was ancient, hundreds of years before the first scientific measurements. But the memory remains, in folklore, and perhaps in stone. It is also strange that at the moment of sound resonance, a weak electrical oscillation begins along the plane of the stone. The devices record a voltage of about 0.30.5 volts, not enough to activate the equipment, but enough to understand the stone reacts, not just with sound, but physically. This phenomenon is possible in crystalline rocks if they have been subjected to shock loading. Perhaps the stone has recorded the effect of sound pressure in its structure, and now, when it is given a signal, it reproduces the form of vibration. This is not music. This is not text. This is a form of memory left in the material, without letters, without an image, only a trace of vibration frozen in stone. Officially, the object is classified as an engineered anomalous stone. This means it is incomprehensible, but subject to preservation. Experiments with it are limited. Tourists are not allowed there. The place is marked on the map, but is not advertised. Maybe it's just geometry, just chance, or maybe it's a way to record what can't be told. Thunder that no one saw, but which the stone remembered. The tower that levitated by design. In the south of Iran, in the Zagros Mountains, near the ancient city of Bishapur, there are ruins designated in archaeological records as Site R12. They are not included in the main routes. There is no road leading to them, only a path trodden by cattle and shepherds. The locals call this place, where the shadow does not fall. In 1968, a French expedition arrived here. The initial goal was to remap the site, but among the rocks and crumbling walls, they discovered a platform. It was almost a perfect circle, laid out with flat slabs, with a raised edge. In the center is the base of the tower, a stone ring about 4 meters in diameter. There are no traces of anything tall standing here, no supports, no fragments of upper levels. But that is not the strangest thing. Upon further study, it turned out that the stones forming the circle have a magnetic field. It is weak, but stable. The compass behaves unnaturally. The arrow does not point north, but rotates slowly, stopping only in the center of the structure. This effect is not natural. The rock is basalt, a common volcanic stone, not prone to magnetization. A year later, a repeat geophysical survey was conducted at the same location. A microscopic decrease in gravitational pressure was recorded at a level of 1 meter above the central point. The measurement is not stable. It is not repeated with each measurement, but several times the value was recorded below the norm, by fractions of a percent. For a scientific report, this deviation is insignificant, but its existence is a fact. Later in the diaries of one of the expedition members, there is a phrase, "You don't want to stand in the center of the circle. The body responds differently than in other places. The pressure is strange, as if the earth is retreating a little." The most controversial part of the report concerns rumors gathered from local residents. One said that when he was a child, old people took him to the site and told him, "They built upwards here without touching the ground." Another claimed to have seen a transparent wall, like water, rise above the circle one evening. These are oral traditions, unverifiable, but they coincide with another detail. The shape of the foundation does not allow for a heavy superstructure. It is too thin, without internal locks and recesses. No tower, neither stone nor brick, could be erected on such a foundation without additional supports. Then the assumption arises. Perhaps there was no tower in the usual sense. Perhaps the object was elevated. Not necessarily flying, not necessarily hovering, but it was elevated, structurally, not architecturally. This idea sounds like speculation, but it is supported by an analysis of proportions. The center of the platform is cut exactly according to the golden ratio. The diameter, angles, indentations, all correspond to the proportions used in acoustic resonators. If a sound source is placed in the center, the stones reflect it in a spiral. This is physically measured. Some researchers suggest that the structure could have been a sonic lift, not literally, not levitation, but manipulation of weight through resonance. Modern experiments show that high-power sound can temporarily move objects when the frequencies are tuned correctly, but this requires energy and precision. If this knowledge existed, it is lost, or it remains, only in form, in a circle, in stones, in a position that no one can explain, but which again and again gives deviations in the readings. Now the platform is abandoned. Not a single sign, not a single plaque. Only coordinates, filed in reports in the archives of Tehran and Paris. The place is not considered a monument. You can pass it and not notice, and yet it exists. Maybe there was a tower here, or maybe it's just a memory that it hung and didn't stand. We don't know. We just feel that in this place everything is not quite as it should be, as if something is still hanging, not in the air but in time, and it hasn't disappeared, it's just become invisible. The city on the mountain, no one can see twice. In the highlands of Colombia, in the Sierra Nevada de Santa Marta region, there is a forested area that even the locals rarely visit. In this part of the country, there are dozens of trails leading to the remains of pre-Hispanic settlements. Some of them are recognized as archaeological heritage. Others remain nameless, overgrown, closed from view. One such case was recorded in 2004. A group of 3 independent researchers surveying the region's biodiversity came across an old stone staircase that had been almost completely swallowed up by earth and roots. They began to climb. The stairs led upward, serpentine, not destroyed, but clearly ancient. As they climbed, stone platforms began, laid out in the form of terraces. Then, the remains of walls, rectangular foundations, the base of a temple. At an altitude of about 2,000 meters, a view opened up, a whole system of buildings connected by paths, with a central square laid out in a circle. No tourists, no signs, no pointers, only silence and a feeling that the place was forgotten, but not destroyed. The researchers filmed the video, recorded the coordinates, and took photographs. They planned to return with the main group. 3 weeks later, the expedition repeated itself. The same people, the same equipment, the same coordinates. But there was no ladder, there was no path, only a cliff covered with small stones. At the top, impassable thickets, and no trace that there were foundations, walls, a square. The GPS indicated the same point. The altitude was the same. The landscape was unrecognizable. Attempts to find the buildings continued for 2 days. None of the routes coincided with the previous one. In the place where there was a terrace in the photo, there was a slope with a water catchment. In the place where there was a temple, there was a stone slab without traces of masonry. A hypothesis was put forward. Perhaps the satellite data was wrong, but the markers were preserved. They matched in time and coordinates. The photos remained. They showed buildings, stone platforms, corners, trees growing along the property lines. Everything was just like in reality, but no one ever saw it again. Some suggest that the explorers were mistaken, tired, confused about the terrain, possibly, but their path is recorded, and it leads to where there is nothing else. Later attempts to find the city came to nothing. Different routes, different groups, none saw any buildings, not a single wall, not a single foundation. The locals, when they heard the description of the place, answered simply, "You have found what sometimes opens, but does not remain." They have no name for the city, no legends, only a word, shadow. In their language, it means not only the absence of light, but also what was, but did not remain. Some researchers have tried to explain this by an atmospheric effect, an illusion caused by overwork or pressure changes. Perhaps, but the photo is not an illusion. The video is not confused. The shadows fall correctly. The perspective is maintained. This is not a trick of perception. One of the pictures, taken in the evening, shows a building with an arch. Inside the arch is a ledge on which lies an object that looks like an ornamented slab. On the edge of the arch is the shadow of a man, one of those who stood there. The shadow is correct. It falls at an angle. This cannot be staged. It happened. But now there is nothing from this city. Not a single piece of evidence except for the files. Not a single witness except for those 3. Not a single attempt to repeat the route successfully. Maybe the city existed. Maybe it didn't disappear, but simply doesn't repeat itself, like some dreams. You remember how you got there, but you can't go back. The map that shows what wasn't supposed to exist. In 1929, a scroll was found in Istanbul's Topkapi Saray, among thousands of Ottoman Empire archival documents. It is about 1 meter long and written on treated leather. The author was famous, Piri Reis, an admiral and cartographer who served under Sultan Selim I. He lived at the beginning of the 16th century and made maps based on the data available to the fleet at that time. But one detail of the map caused a chain reaction of interest. On the southern part of the scroll was an unknown outline, a coastline stretching far south from the known South America. There were no cities on it, only mountains, rivers, and small markings. Modern comparison has shown that the contour resembles the coast of Antarctica, but with one amendment: it is depicted without ice cover. This caused controversy. Antarctica was officially discovered in 1820. Before that, it had not been depicted on maps. In the 16th century, there were no instruments or routes that would allow its outlines to be recorded, and especially without ice. However, the outline on the Peary Race map matches the profile of the subglacial coastline reconstructed using modern radar. This is not an obvious match. It is a topographic match. The contours, the bays, the protrusions are precise at the kilometer level. How is this possible? Peary Rees himself points to sources. He claims to have used older maps that he received from other navigators and libraries. In his explanation, he writes that this data is from times we do not know. He does not name names. He does not cite the originals, only the result. Some people think it's a coincidence, an artistic intuition, a reconstruction based on hearsay. But then why do not only the shapes match, but also the orientation and the lack of glaciers? Modern scientists suggest that perhaps the coastline could have been partially exposed in ancient times during a temporary warm spell. There is a hypothesis that about 12,000 years ago, part of Antarctica could have been ice-free. Then the map could have been redrawn from an older source. But then another question arises: who saw it? Who had the technology to navigate to the southern latitudes before the beginning of written history? And most importantly, who was able to record, compare, and transfer this data into a coordinate system suitable for subsequent generations? This is not the only example. There are other maps, Orontius Phineas, Bush, Haji Ahmet, that also depict the southern lands with amazing accuracy. Perhaps they used the same basis, a map that no longer exists, but which once was. Some alternative history proponents suggest that in prehistoric times there was a maritime civilization with skills in long-distance navigation and mapping. Almost no traces of it remain. Only fragments, only coincidences, only inconsistencies. The Peary Race map is not a fake, it is not a myth, it is a document, researched, kept, authentic, and it shows something that should not have been there. Maybe it's a mistake. It could be. Maybe it's a coincidence. It happens. But sometimes if one detail doesn't match, it's a question. And if there are several, it's already a structure. And then the map becomes not a display of geography, but a trace of someone who already knew what would be discovered only 300 years later. The people who buried their culture on purpose. In the southeastern region of Turkey, in the Sanliurfa region, something was discovered at the end of the 20th century that at first seemed to be just another hill. It was called Tepelik. There are hundreds of similar hills in the region. Many are artificial, formed by layers of human activity. Locals knew that the remains of settlements could be hidden under such mounds. But Tepelik was different. In 1994, German archaeologist Klaus Schmidt began excavating the hill, which would later be named Göbekli Tepe. And it became clear almost immediately. Beneath it was more than just a settlement. Beneath it was a complex built thousands of years before the first known cities. Enormous T-shaped stone columns decorated with carvings, walls laid out with mathematical precision, ring-shaped platforms, animals, signs, abstractions, all hand-carved from solid stone. No metal, no wheels, no writing. Göbekli Tepe dates back to around 9,500 BCE. That's not a mistake. It's backed up by organic matter analysis, radiocarbon dating, and stratigraphy. It's before agriculture, before settlements, before temples, before everything. But there is one aspect that makes Göbekli Tepe special. It was filled in on purpose, not destroyed, not abandoned, but carefully, layer by layer, filled in with small rubble, debris, sand, no signs of haste, no signs of violence, not a disaster, not a fire, but a solution. It's strange. Archaeologically, it's rare. Usually abandoned places remain destroyed, partially dismantled, slowly disappearing. This is different. The complex is mothballed. Complex, labor-intensive, created with effort, and covered up, as if so that no one would see. Why? Some believe it was a ritual, a closing of the sanctuary, a cycle completed by its own concealment, as if the act of creation itself were not the end, but merely a stage followed by erasure, create and bury. There is another version, that what was here turned out to be dangerous, not in the physical sense, but in the sense of knowledge. Perhaps it was a complex connected with astronomy, with observation, with a certain type of worldview that needed to be removed from practice, and the only way was to bury it in the ground. There are no written traces of that time, no explanations, no treatises, only form, only orientations, only animals, birds, hands, elongated symbols. Some columns depict scenes that are still not understood. They are not repeated elsewhere. They are not associated with other cultures. Göbekli Tepe, isolated, in time, in style, in the decision to leave. When archaeologists began to uncover one circle, another appeared underneath, smaller, older, then another, as if each new circle was built on top of the previous one, and then everything was covered. The cycle repeated itself. This is not a mistake. This is a repeated intention, creation and erasure. Why? Maybe it was a culture for which permanence had no meaning. Maybe their goal was not to preserve, but to let go. Maybe they knew that everything they built would eventually become a lie, and so as not to leave a lie, they buried the truth. Now, 12,000 years later, we are uncovering these circles, peeling back layer after layer, trying to understand. But maybe understanding isn't what they wanted. Maybe all they wanted was for us to know. There was something important here once, and they hid it. Not because they were afraid, but because it was gone. The city walls that face inward? In the north of modern Jordan, on a plateau near the Zarqa River Valley, archaeologists have explored the ruins of a little-known settlement dating back to the late Bronze Age. It is not marked on major maps and is not included in the list of the most important cultural centers of the region. And yet there are remains of streets, squares, fragments of pottery, and stone buildings. Everything that indicates that this was once a living place. But there is one feature that distinguishes it from others. The city is surrounded by a wall. This is not uncommon. Defensive walls are a common practice of that time. But in this case, the wall is laid out from the inside out. On the outside, there is a smooth surface not protected by loopholes. On the inside, there are fortifications, passages, support niches, approaches for defense. Everything that usually faces the enemy is here facing the city center. At first, it was thought to be a construction error. Perhaps the walls had been rebuilt. Perhaps the landmark had changed. But archaeological layers show that the wall was built at the same time as the building. The foundation is common. The fastenings are primary. This is not a remake. This is a solution. The question arises, from whom was the city defending itself? If the enemy was outside, the structure is illogical. If from the inside, then the wall takes on a different meaning. Perhaps it was not defensive, but ritual. Perhaps the purpose of the wall is not to keep the enemy outside, but to keep something inside. In the central part of the city, along the axis of the walls, there is an open circular courtyard paved with slabs. It is empty, no traces of fire, no columns, just a circle, with a depression in the center. It does not contain water. It does not lead into the depths, just a stone circle in a circle, like a target. Some believe it is a cult structure, a ritual center. But then why the wall? Why not a temple? Why are the battle platforms facing inward? There is a carving on one section of the wall, a recurring motif, a curved figure with outstretched arms, no faces, no clothes, only movement. It is directed towards the center, as if repulsive. When the researchers did an acoustic analysis, they found that the walls reflected sound inward, creating a gain effect. If someone spoke on the inside, the echo returned to the center of the courtyard, amplifying it. This is not a bug, it is a design. Maybe the walls weren't built to repel the enemy, but to contain the voice, or whatever it was. The city did not exist for long. The layers show life lasted 2 or 3 generations, then a fire, not a big one. Without destroying the walls, only houses, and disappearance. No traces of return, no new buildings, only sand and silence. No texts, no name, neither in Assyrian sources nor in Egyptian ones. The city remained nameless, only a plan, only the direction of the wall, only an outline. Supporters of the anthropological version believe that the orientation of the walls is symbolic, that it reflects a model of the world where the danger is not outside, where the ritual is not for an external god, but for an internal one, where the city is not a defense, but a capsule. Maybe it was, or maybe they just built the city differently because they knew sometimes protection is not a barrier. It's a form of memory, of something that once came out from within. The structure without a single tool mark. In western Sardinia, at the foot of the Monte Santa Maria Plateau, there are ruins that in archaeological records are listed under the technical code S41. The site was first described in 1938 as part of a megalithic complex typical of the island's prehistoric structures. At first, no one paid much attention. The area is full of remnants of the Nuragic culture, round towers, walls, burials, but object S41 was different, not in form, but in processing. This is neither a tower nor a temple. It is a massive platform, partially cut into the rock, with 4 protrusions on the sides. Everything would be fine if not for one detail. Not a single trace of processing was found on the entire object. No cut, no chip, no direction of impact. The surface is perfectly smooth, like polished limestone with no signs of impact, sawing, or crushing. Even microscopic analysis did not reveal the lines along which the work was carried out. The stone looks like it was formed, not processed, like it was poured, not cut, but it is not concrete, not an artificial material. It is limestone, natural, dense, with a uniform crystalline structure. This is contrary to all known building practices in Sardinia. No culture that lived here had access to technology capable of processing stone without leaving traces. Marks always remain, from copper, bronze, iron tools. Even from stone ones, even more so. The soil layer above the platform indicates age not less than 4,000 years, possibly more. Precise dating has not been obtained because there is no organic material, only stone. Researchers suggested that perhaps the shape was formed naturally. Erosion, wind, water. But the structure is too regular. The angles are right angles. The lines are parallel. All the projections are equal. This is not a spontaneous form. There is a depression on the surface of the platform, almost a circle, about 3 meters in diameter, a palm deep. It is perfectly smooth, no traces of drips, no cracks, as if it was pressed in. But the stone is not plastic. An attempt to model the shape in 3D showed that the structure is built on the principle of geometric symmetry with the center in the depression, as if everything else grows from there, not in the sense of architecture, but in the sense of directional crystallization. It's absurd. But there are no other hypotheses. No known culture could do this, even in theory. Even with the knowledge, there is no tool that would do it without leaving a trace. There are analogies. The monolith in Baalbek, the processing in Sacsayhuaman, the laser precision in the temples of India. But everywhere, microtraces remain. And here, emptiness, an ideal surface, without a beginning, without a trace of a hand. Alternative archaeologists believe that this is a remnant of a lost technology, perhaps knowledge of frequency processing, sound, pressure, vibration, perhaps not a tool, but a state. But without evidence, it's all just a hypothesis. What's left? The platform stands, it doesn't crack, it doesn't sink into the ground, it doesn't change, it's stable. It is uninhabited, there are no traces of life around, no bones, no ceramics, no coal, only dust and grass at the edges, as if someone once did this and left. And now it just is, without function, without purpose, without past. And when you stand next to it, you can't tell what it is, only that it's unlike anything else. Not like a temple, not like an altar, not like technology. It doesn't fit. It's as if someone left a geometric thought, but not an explanation. And now we just watch and remain silent, because even our tools leave no trace, as if the platform refuses to let history in. The forgotten network of underground bridges. On the border between Slovakia and Hungary, in an area where the gentle hills give way to plateaus, there is a network of underground passages that are only partially known. The first mentions of them date back to the 18th century, as mining passages used for the production of salt and iron. But in the 20th century, geologists discovered that some of them go far beyond logistical needs. Some tunnels don't lead to deposits. They connect points that aren't related to mining. They're called simply crossings. Transitions, because they do not lead to a goal. They lead between. During excavations of one of the sites in 1993, the team came across a wide stone arch underground. The walls are not lined. The stone is laid by hand. The arch is part of a gallery that connects 2 hills separated by a valley. On the surface, there is nothing. No settlement, no fortress, no old road, only grass, and underground, a bridge connecting 2 voids. Why? There are more than 10 such bridges. They are located under the hills, within a 20-kilometer zone. The depth is from 8 to 20 meters. The walls are even. The ceilings are preserved. The arches are laid without mortar, with precise adjustment. The style is the same. Archaeologists compare this to the engineering solutions of Rome. But the technique is different. There are no caissons, no supports. The structure works on the distribution of weight, not on the frame. This speaks of conscious design. But the main thing is the purpose. No gallery leads to a functional center, not to a mine, not to a temple, not to a storage facility, only from point to point. Sometimes these points are just emptiness, sometimes they are a dead end. And yet there is a passage. It was made laboriously, by hand, without tools that left a trace, only blocks, only a vault, only a passage. One hypothesis is that these are ritual channels. Perhaps the passages were used in rituals, but there are no traces of sacrifices, no ashes, no bones, no inscriptions. Others suggest that it is knowledge of underground navigation. People could move without being seen, but who needed to hide in an era when there were no cities here? Others say it's an imitation, that someone copied the structure without understanding it. Maybe they copied something older, but then where's the original? Some tunnels have acoustic features. When you step, the sound increases. Some bends create the effect of complete silence. There are areas where you can only hear your own breathing, and even that is distorted. One tunnel leads to a stone circle, an empty room with a dome. In the center is a pedestal, no symbols, no function. But the sound in this room does not go away. It returns, without distortion, as if the air is trapped. The locals call this place the throat of the earth. But no one can say who built it. There are no legends, only feelings. Some are afraid to approach, not out of fear, but out of an incomprehensible respect. Official documents describe the tunnels as secondary rock formations with non-standard engineering logic. That's a technical way of saying we don't understand what they're for. Today, most of the passages are closed. Some are buried, others have collapsed, but the network is still there. It exists in silence, without light, without roots. Maybe these bridges were for something we don't do anymore, for journeys that weren't physical, for a connection that was not on the surface. Maybe it's all just labor and stone, or maybe we're looking in the wrong place, and bridges don't connect space, but time. The island that appeared on maps for 300 years. Between Iceland and Ireland, in the North Atlantic Ocean, an island had been marked on nautical charts for centuries. Its name changed. Sometimes it was called Friesland, sometimes High Brazil. But the essence remained. It was recorded, described, outlined. It had a shape, coordinates, a history. It first appears on a map by Niccolò Zeno, dating from 1558. There it is depicted as a large island, almost square, with a city and mountains. The description was accompanied by letters, supposedly, mentioning that there is a civilization on the island. People, light, language. Next up are the maps of Gerhard Mercator, the most famous cartographer who founded the projection system that is still used today. He also includes the island in his materials, not as a rumor, as a fact. Then Janssen, Ortelius, even the British Admiralty Archive. Up until the beginning of the 19th century, the island is present. It has a shape, scale, climate. On some maps, even a description of the flora. But in reality, it does not exist. Numerous expeditions in the 19th and 20th centuries set out for the designated area. The result? Nothing. Just ocean. No rocks. No shoals. No traces. No magnetic anomalies. Just an ordinary sea surface. The question arises, how could the object remain on the maps for so long? There are several options. The first is a mistake. One captain marked something on the map that wasn't there. The others repeated it. It happened. But 3 centuries? In a system where cartographic accuracy matters? The second is a mirage. Perhaps a special atmospheric phenomenon allowed the reflection of the Earth to be seen. But mirages do not repeat themselves exactly. And the coordinates were indicated with amazing stability. Third, the island existed, but disappeared. Perhaps volcanic. Perhaps an underwater platform that was destroyed. But the ocean depth in that area does not indicate recent geological shifts. There is no evidence of land, uplift, or destruction. One version of the British Archive notes, "Sailors avoid this place. They are not sure what they saw, but they are sure what they felt." The entry is dated 1783. Modern researchers point out that High Brazil is not the only case. Similar ghost islands appear and disappear. Sandy Island off the coast of Australia, Isle of Demons off Canada, they were all on maps, they were named, and then they disappeared. High Brazil is notable for being described as inhabited. A 14th century manuscript says that a ship that had lost its course reached the island but was unable to land. It was surrounded by fog, and there was light coming from the shore, not fires, but a glow. It is a legend, but behind it is a recurring phenomenon, an island that someone saw, recorded, and refused to repeat. Today, High Brazil no longer appears on modern maps. Only cartography historians and enthusiasts know about it. The place in the ocean where it should be is silent. Satellites see nothing. Navigation proceeds without deviations. but on old maps it is there, clear, reliable, sure, as if it was once part of the known world, and then it ceased to be. The road that leads to no culture. In South America, in the Peruvian part of the Nazca Plateau, there is an object that has not attracted much interest for a long time. Attention is traditionally drawn to the lines, huge geoglyphs depicting animals, figures, and abstractions. But away from them, on the elevated part of the plateau, there is a road, straight as a blueprint, about 3 meters wide, more than 17 kilometers long. You can't see it from the ground in its entirety, only from the air can you see how linear it is. It doesn't curve. It doesn't follow the terrain. It passes over hills and rocky areas as if nothing else matters. It's as if someone drew a line and followed it. It leads into nothingness. There is nothing at either end of it. No temple, no settlement, no water, only sand and stone, no signs of use, no expansions, no fortifications. The road is paved with a burnt gravel crust. Its surface is dense, leveled. At the same time, the road is not a wheeled one. No traces of potholes, no traces of hooves. This is not a path for transport. This is a strip, formed as if it were intended not for movement, but for direction. The first study was conducted in the 1930s. At that time, it was considered part of a religious infrastructure, perhaps by ritual. But ritual requires points, a beginning, a culmination, an end. Here there is no beginning and no end, only movement in a straight line, into a landscape where there is not even a shadow of man-made. Then another version was put forward, astronomical orientation. Perhaps the road points to the sunrise point on the day of the solstice. But checks showed the deviation is several degrees, does not correspond to ritual accuracy, and most importantly, the lines in Nazca usually point to a visible object, here to an empty sky. Some archaeologists began to compare the road with similar objects in Egypt, Mesoamerica, and Tibet. Everywhere such roads connect, a temple with a tomb, a city with a burial vault, a point of power with a place of sacrifice. Here, there is no second point. Later another feature was noticed. It is inconvenient to walk along the road. The stones reflect the light. The surface is hard. Even without shoes, locals find it hard to move. Animals go around it. This is not a path designed for movement. This is a path designed for presence. Locals avoid it, not because they're afraid, but because it leads nowhere. This is not a metaphor. This is a fact. The road exists. It is smooth. It is visible from space. It is marked on maps. But in both directions, there is emptiness. One hypothesis is that it is a direction line, not for people, for sight, perhaps for a celestial object, or for something that was meant to be seen from above, not as part of a map, but as a message. But who was this message addressed to? Someone put effort into creating a path, leading not to a goal, but to nothing, or to where something once was and disappeared, or to where there was never anything except the road itself. Maybe that was the point. To leave the path, not to walk it, but to just have it. Straight, wind, light, no movement, just a line. The calendar that ends without starting. In a desert area on the border of Mexico and Guatemala, in an area not marked on popular archaeological routes, in 1971, a group of independent researchers discovered a fragment of a stone slab. The slab was partially sunken into the ground, overgrown with roots. No local knew it was there. No catalog mentioned it. It wasn't a temple. It wasn't a center. Just a fragment. Half. On the outside were concentric circles, barely visible. There were 15 of them, all cut with great precision. Not a picture, not a symbol, not an ornament. They contained no animals, had no decorative value, just geometry. At first glance, the object resembled a calendar. This is not uncommon in Central America. The civilizations of the region, the Mayans, the Olmecs, the Zapotecs, created systems of chronology that were complex, precise, and based on astronomy. But this object was different. First, it had no beginning. The circles went outward from the center, as usual, but in the center there was nothing. No date, no marker, no zero symbol, nothing. Just a smooth surface. Secondly, the last 3 circles on the periphery were empty. Where other calendars marked days, gods, events, there was a smooth stone ring, as if the carving had stopped or had not begun. It was later revealed that everything depicted on the slab ends within the first 9 circles. The rest are decorated but do not contain data. A hypothesis was put forward. This is an unfinished calendar. It was started, but not finished. The problem is that the level of precision of the circle indicates the final stage of carving. In such systems, circles are not cut out first, but completed. Empty rings are not a consequence of incompleteness, but a solution. When scanning, it turned out that the empty rings had a different depth distribution, not chaotic, not defective, but with a certain rhythm, as if it were not a calendar of time, but a calendar of disappearance. It sounds strange, but the data shows the values within the first 9 circles correspond to the known cycles of the Mayan system, the 260-day cycle, the solar year, the Venusian phases. It's all there. It all matches. But beyond that, no. The last circles are not only empty, they are sealed. Their surface is polished, as if someone deliberately decided there will be nothing there. The local shamans, whom the researchers approached, looked at the slab and said briefly that this circle was not about counting. It was about the end. When asked about the end of what, they did not answer. It later turned out that in local mythology there is a legend about a day that will be, but will not come. It is a day that is in every calendar, but is not designated. Not because it does not exist, but because it is beyond time. Not a mistake, but a boundary. Some people think it's a philosophical concept, a limit to counting, a cycle that has no end because it never began, a calendar that hasn't started, but is already complete. This slab may be an attempt to express this, physically, not in words, but in structure. Researchers have tried to reconstruct the original shape. Perhaps the slab was part of a larger circle. But in the surrounding area, there are no other fragments, no stones, no walls, nothing that would indicate a temple, a site, an observatory. Everything points to the fact that the slab was independent, not part of a complex, but a center in itself. What is especially interesting is that, according to calculations, if the plate had continued, its outer circle would have coincided with a date close to our 2025. This does not mean that it predicted anything, but the coincidence was recorded. Some supporters of alternative hypotheses believe that the plate records the moment of zeroing, not as a catastrophe, but as a return to a point where time did not begin. Not the end of the world, but an exit from time. It's hard to express. But the form itself says, where there should be zero, silence. Where there should be a finale, a surface. No dates, no numbers, only a trace of a circle, nothing more. Today the slab is kept in a private foundation. It cannot be seen, it is not exhibited. Only photographs, only copies, and yet it remains. A calendar that has no beginning. A calendar in which the date is silence, not because it was not written, but because it was intended that way. The letters from a civilization no one remembers. In 1986, archaeologists were conducting routine excavations on the outskirts of a famous Elamite complex in Iran, near the ancient city of Shush. The site did not seem promising. Calculations indicated that the site had been used for outbuildings, perhaps granaries. However, at a depth of just over 1.5 meters, a find was discovered that did not fit into any of the existing systems. It was a box made of baked clay, heavy, rectangular, with a sealed edge. At first they thought it was a burial urn, but when they opened it, they found plates inside, laid horizontally, almost like pages. 19 in all. Each was made of thin, pressed slate with symbols etched into its surface. They weren't pictures, they were text. None of the symbols matched the known scripts of the region. Not Sumerian, not Elamite, not Urartian signs. The symbols resembled a linear structure, but without grammatical logic. There are repetitions, but the rhythm is elusive. Some glyphs stand alone, others are grouped. The composition resembles writing, but not language. The first decipherments yielded no results. Researchers assumed that it was a counting system or a code. But statistical analysis showed a stable frequency distribution characteristic of a linguistic system, not a numerical one. Later, linguists joined the work. One of them, Dr. Hosseini, suggested that what we had before us was not a code or a language of live communication, but a written protocol of knowledge. Orderly, verified, intended not for communication, but for storage. On one of the plates, structures resembling maps were revealed. Where the text turns into symbols, the outlines of rivers and plateaus similar to the northern part of Zagros can be traced, but the coordinates do not match modern ones. Perhaps this is a reflection of another geography that was known but no longer recorded. The main thing is that no culture in the region mentions the authors of these tablets. No references, no borrowings. Neither in late Elamite nor in early Persian. As if those who wrote this text left no other traces. It is impossible. Writing is the pinnacle of accumulated knowledge. It is not created in isolation. It is preceded by craft, structure, need. But here there is no chain, only the object, and no traces before or after. Some people think it's a marginal culture. Small in numbers, short-lived, maybe. But then the question arises, why create protocols that no one is supposed to read? The plates are carefully laid out. The clay they were stored in is dense, baked. Everything points to preservation, as if something important was being passed on, and to no one. According to the date, it is approximately the 12th century BC. The time of migrations, destruction, change of cultural vectors. Perhaps this is the remainder of knowledge that was not included in the new systems. Perhaps it is a conscious separation from them. In one of the texts, there is a noticeable repetition, the same symbol, repeated 47 times. Next to it is another, only once. Linguists do not know how to interpret this, but some believe that it could be a name and signature, as if each sign were a person. Today the tablets are kept in a museum in Tehran. They are being studied, but slowly. The material is fragile. Every movement is a risk of destruction. Electronic copies are available, but without decryption, they do not speak. Maybe someday they will be understood, maybe not. Not because they are complex, but because they are not tied to any of the systems by which we read the past. And perhaps this is not a mistake, but a choice. A culture that wrote for itself, and understood that no one else would read it. The city that was built without doors. In the northwestern part of Pakistan, near the border with Afghanistan, in the Kohat Valley, excavations were started in 1962 by a joint team of Pakistani and British archaeologists. The region is poorly studied. It is located in a remote mountainous area where sediments wash away the soil and tectonic shifts gradually reveal what has lain under layers of earth and rock for centuries. The discovered settlement was initially no different from many others. Rectangular foundations, courtyards, stone-paved streets. Dating, approximately 4 to 3 RD millennium BC. But after a few weeks of work, it became clear. Something was wrong here. Not a single building had an entrance. No doorways, niches, or traces of frames were found on the foundations and lower levels of the walls. Not in residential buildings, not in administrative buildings, not in potential storage facilities. All walls are solid. The stonework is even. The seams are precise but closed. At first, it was assumed that the doorways were higher up, perhaps entering through the roof. This practice is known. In some Mesoamerican and Middle Eastern cultures, entry was through the ceiling, via stairs, or with the help of movable ceilings. However, upon further investigation, not a single staircase was found, either inside or outside the buildings. No traces of flooring, no fastenings, no elements indicating vertical access. Each building is like a sealed mold. A square was discovered in the central part of the complex. Ceramic fragments, traces of fireplaces, and organic remains were found there. This suggests that people lived here. They used the space, they ate, they performed rituals, but they lived in a space without entrances. Some have suggested that the building could have been used as a storage facility, where something was placed and then sealed. But the scale of the settlement and its regular structure suggest otherwise. It is a city, with streets, geometry, drainage. It was not built as a warehouse, but as a home. On the inner walls of some buildings, recesses were found. They are located high, almost under the ceiling. Perhaps they laid flooring there, perhaps something else. But no remains of wood or metal fastenings were found. One hypothesis is that the buildings were not used for living, but as capsules, spaces in which something else happened. Isolation, ritual, memory storage. But then why does the city consist only of such buildings? If it was a cult complex, why does it occupy the entire territory? Why is there no transition between the sacred and the everyday? Here, there is no difference. The entire structure is the same. Later, a section of wall with symbols was found. Geometric figures laid out with small stones. They resemble stylized loops or spirals. Not a single symbol was recognized. There is no connection with known systems, but they repeat in the same order, as if they were recording movement. Not in space, but in state. Not a single door has ever been found. When the research was completed, one of the archaeologists wrote in his diary, "This is a city that was built not to enter, or maybe not to leave. What this means is unclear." Maybe architecture reflects a worldview, a need not to divide space into internal and external. Maybe it is a trace of a culture in which the personal and the public were not opposed, where space was perceived not as protection, but as a slowdown. Or maybe it's an attempt to stop, to create a place that can't be entered, but which is here. It's not hidden, not disguised, only closed from the start. Today, the ruins of this city are abandoned. There are no tourists, no security, Locals avoid the place, saying that it is not bad, but incomprehensible. It does not scare, but it does not call either. You can still see the outlines of buildings. You can still walk along the streets, but all you see is the outside. There is no transition to the inside, only facades, only form. And this is perhaps all that remains of the city that existed in its own closed rhythm. The children buried with stars on their bones. In northeastern Siberia, in the Kolyma River region, in 2014, a group of archaeologists explored areas of permafrost where soil anomalies were recorded. With climate change and thawing of ancient layers, new areas of interest began to appear. One of them, designated layer K17, revealed a find that didn't fit into the usual picture from the very beginning. It was a burial, small, shallow. Inside were two children's skeletons. Age, approximately 3 to 5 years. Position, parallel. Bodies oriented to the northwest. No coffin, no sarcophagus. Only earth, a stone base, and remains of organic material. At first, the find seemed ordinary. The region is known for Neolithic burials, but a careful study of the bones revealed that symbols had been carved into the surfaces of the skull, shoulder bones, and pelvis. They were not made after death. There are no signs of damage, no cracks, no signs of healing. The symbols seem to have grown with the bone, were inside, barely visible. Only under special lighting did they appear as a network of thin lines forming star shapes. The analysis showed that the bone structure contains inclusions of mineral composition containing rare earth elements. Their source is unknown. There are no such compounds in the surrounding soil. There is only clay, ice, and peat nearby. The chemical composition indicates that the elements entered the body before death, probably during life, but how exactly is unclear. They are not toxic. They do not leave traces of poisoning. They simply exist inside the bone structure in the form of a geometric pattern. The shapes themselves resemble constellations. One of the drawings is almost an exact projection of Orion. Another is the Pleiades. But this is not identity, but a structural correspondence. The arrangement of points, angles, connections. This cannot be a coincidence. It can't be an interpretation either. The lines are inside the bone. No known ritual, no technique could leave a trace of such precision inside living tissue. No other remains were found nearby, just two, no adult, no artifacts, no settlement, just two people, all alone, in the permafrost. Some researchers have put forward a hypothesis. Children could have been part of a ritual, perhaps connected with the cult of stars. But traces of such a cult have not been found in this region. Not in monuments, not in petroglyphs, not in adjacent cultures. Another version is a genetic mutation, but it does not explain the geometry. Mutations do not draw patterns. They deform. Here is order. There was an attempt to find analogies. In Mongolia, in Yakutia, in northern China. Nothing similar has been recorded. The symbols are unique. The drawing does not repeat. Paleogenetic analysis did not show any connection with known populations. Genome partially coincides with Siberian hunters, but has a significant difference. As if it is a closed line, not mixed, not continued. Some believe the children are aliens from another community that disappeared. But then why were they the only ones left? Why were they left alone? Their bodies were undisturbed, no traces of violence, no attempt to hide. All that is there is neatness, symmetry, and the impossibility of explanation. The remains are now stored in a special lab. The bones are handled only with gloves. Research continues. But there is no point, no data, no culture, no context, only children. And a pattern of stars that no one put in, but which still appeared. The song carved into the earth. In the southwest of India, in the state of Karnataka, near the Tungabhadra River, archaeologists have discovered an object that was long considered a fragment of agricultural terracing. From the air, the site appeared as a series of cut ledges along the slope, regular, symmetrical, almost perfect in their repetition. The site stretches for more than a kilometer and covers several levels, connected by narrow cuts reminiscent of ancient steps. The first studies were carried out in the 1980s, but then the attention of archaeologists focused on larger objects in the region, the ruins of Vijayanagara, the capital of the empire of the same name. The site was considered late, possibly colonial. However, in 2016, a digital topographic survey was conducted. It revealed something odd. All the ledges on the site are not just symmetrical, They are built in a precise relationship to the distance, angle of inclination, and depth of the cut. The object resembled not so much a terrace as a wave diagram fixed in stone. During subsequent measurements, geophysicists suggested superimposing the shape of the structure on the spectrogram. The coincidence was unexpected. One of the relief fragments coincided with the visual projection of the sound wave. Not in the details, but in the form, structure, logic of construction. The relief profile in 3 dimensions turned out to be identical to certain types of frequencies used in ritual instruments of southern India. The proposition was simple. What if it is not a terrace, not a canal, not a wall? What if the object is a recording of sound, made in a material not intended to be read, but to record a form? Later, acousticians joined the work. One of them, Dr. Rajesh Aravind, conducted computer modeling. He translated the profile of the cuts into audio parameters and ran it through a frequency generator. The result is neither music nor speech. But the structure had a sound amplitude. It was not chaotic. It was not noise. It was not a technical interference. It was a stable wave. The experiment was repeated in another area. The same system, the same logic, different signals, but a single model. The object began to be perceived differently, no longer as a result of economic activity, but as an engineering structure based on the principles of geometry and wave analysis, not to be walked on, but to be perceived, perhaps in a different register. Traditional archaeologists objected. They said the shape could be the result of erosion, the result of water flow, destruction, or weathering, but none of these explanations explained the regularity. The relief sections were not simply leveled, they were coordinated with each other, as if someone had drawn them with a ruler and compass. The stone is granite. It is not easy to work. No traces of tools, no seams, no blocks, only a cut, as if the rock had been removed in layers and not cut out. One hypothesis suggested that this was the result of impact, perhaps vibration or pressure, but then the shape would be destructive. Here, the rhythm is preserved. The strangest thing began when changes in sound began to be recorded near the site. Groups passing through the site noticed that the sound of footsteps changed as they moved. Not just an echo, but an amplitude modulation, as if the earth itself was telling them how to move. One of the researchers conducted an experiment. He started walking along a section with a metronome. At each step, the sound deviated, first in the direction of increasing frequency, then in the direction of decreasing. Later, this coincided with fluctuations in the spectrum obtained from the relief profile. What does this mean? Perhaps a sound sequence was once performed here, using the structure of the earth as a resonant base. Perhaps this is an architectural score, intended not for the eye but for the ear. Monuments of this kind do exist. In Peru there are singing steps. In Burma there are temples whose acoustics amplify one specific word. But nowhere is there a relief that conveys sound in form. Not a single note was written here, not a single sign was left, only a shape, only a stone, only a profile. It has been suggested that the object is a remnant of knowledge lost along with those who created it. Perhaps they did not convey meaning through language, but through resonance, through the way of experiencing space, through the relationship between body and form. One of the expedition members said that this is not a memory of a song, this is the song itself, but in matter. And perhaps he is right. Perhaps something really did sound here once, something that could not be spoken, only passed, heard not by the ears, but by movement, and now all that remains is the form, extended, silent, precise. The object is not destroyed, it is still open, but almost no one knows that it exists. On satellite maps, it is marked as a fragment of agricultural work. In reports, as an analyzed object. In reality, it is a rhythm fixed in stone. It does not ask for an explanation. It does not require deciphering. It does not speak, but it is there. The ritual that repeats without witnesses. In Iceland, on the Snæfellsnes Peninsula, there is a piece of land that has been recorded in weather reports for the last 60 years as being of little use for construction. The reason is not the climate, but regular surface changes in the relief. The soil there is constantly rising and then falling. Every few months, geodetic sensors detect a barely noticeable vibration of the surface, which is not accompanied by seismic activity or temperature jumps. At first, this was attributed to the natural respiration of the volcanic earth. The region is subject to geothermal activity. However, in 1973, during expanded geodetic monitoring, it was noticed that the oscillations did not occur chaotically, but with a periodicity that fit into a 243-day cycle. During this time, the changes accumulate, and then, over the course of 2 days, the area rises as a single plateau, then returns to its original position. The shape of the elevation is always the same. The radius is about 60 meters. The rise is from 6 to 9 centimeters. Visually, it is almost unnoticeable, but the sensors confirm that the surface is moving, slowly, without noise, without shifting the ground, as if something inside lifts it up and lowers it again. In 1981, an observation camp was set up here for the first time. No events were recorded during the entire cycle. But at the moment of ascent, some participants spoke of a sound that they could not record. It was not audible to the ear, but felt like pressure in the chest. The instruments did not detect any frequencies, only a slight surge of electromagnetic noise. After that, silence. Later, geologists sent a probe into the area, suggesting the presence of a void, an underground chamber or reservoir. But echolocation showed only heterogeneity of the soil, not a cavity, not water, not gas. Something that reflects the signal selectively, as if there is a structure underground, neither dense nor loose, but transitional. After a few years, attention to the site waned. It had no economic or construction value, but an independent group of researchers continued to record changes. By 2002, the cycle had not changed for a single day. That's when observations began that are difficult to explain. Satellite images taken at different times showed that as you ascend the plateau, paths appear. Not trails, not ruts, but even, almost symmetrical stripes in the grass, as if someone was moving in a circle. The diameter of these circles matched the geometry of the ascent. They disappeared after a few hours. No one came. The cameras recorded nothing. The equipment was in a guarded mode, but traces appeared. One of the pictures shows a stone in the center of the circle. It wasn't there before. It disappeared after a day. No drag marks, no prints. Just a brief presence of form, and then its absence. Researchers began calling this phenomenon a ritual without participants. Something was happening, but without action, without actors, without observable events, only an outcome. When the scientists tried to remain in place during the ascent, some described sensations similar to mild disorientation. One person experienced a brief loss of orientation in time. He said he stood for 10 seconds, and almost half an hour had passed, but no medical abnormalities were found. No anomalies in the structure of space have been recorded either, just a point where something is repeated regularly and stably, with a consistency that is not found in any known natural cycle. Attempts to decipher the geometry of the tracks have led to nothing. They do not fit into traditional measurement systems. But when compared with some archetypal structures, mandalas, Venus observation schemes, ancient Cambodian drawings, certain intersections arise, not exact, but according to the logic of construction. This allowed us to assume that we are dealing with a ritual machine that operates without human intervention, or with a process whose trace does not disappear because it does not depend on the action. There is no scientific explanation for this yet. No energy, no participant, no function, only repetition. And every time the relief rises again, it becomes clear. This is not an accident. This is a structure that does not stop, even if no one sees it. The observatory that faced the wrong stars. On a high plateau in the Atlas Mountains in northern Morocco, a structure that was initially thought to be an ancient fortress was discovered in 1998. It consisted of a limestone ring surrounded by rectangular compartments. The central part was partially destroyed, but the inner circle was preserved well enough to measure angles and orientations. The diameter of the complex is about 60 meters. The walls are up to 2 meters thick at the base. But further measurements revealed that the structure had no signs of military use. There were no observation towers, no places for weapons, no depressions, no underground rooms. Instead, there are successive planes at precise angles to the horizon, and cutouts in the stone walls through which the sun and stars pass on certain days. This has led to the assumption that the object is an ancient observatory. Such structures are known in many cultures: Stonehenge, Corral, the observatory in Uxmal, Mayan structures. Their common feature is orientation to celestial bodies, the sun, the moon, visible planets, important star points. But there was a problem with the Moroccan object. All its landmarks were shifted. One of the passes was not aimed at the equinox sunrise as expected, but at a point where there is currently nothing. Another was not aimed at the North Star, but at a zone in which there are no known bright objects. All the main reference points were to the sky, which today seems empty. Calculations showed that when using the standard precessional model, in which the Earth's axis slowly changes direction over thousands of years, the orientation of the complex does not coincide with any of the known time periods. They do not correspond to the sky today, nor in 1000 BC, nor in 3000, nor in 10,000. With any permissible displacement of the celestial sphere, these angles do not lead to the stars. This creates a paradox. The object was obviously designed as an instrument. The geometry, repeatability, precision indicate the use of celestial bodies as landmarks, but these landmarks are unverifiable. They do not exist in the known history of the sky. Some have suggested an alternative explanation. Perhaps the object was used not for observation, but for imitation. That is, it is not an observatory in the literal sense, but a replica of the starry sky intended for ritual use. But this version suffers from a lack of context. No images, no writing, no drawings, no symbols, only stone and corners. Inside one of the compartments, a fragment of a clay slab was found, on which a fragment of a grid is visible. Not a map, not a calendar, but a pattern similar to a projection. It also does not correspond to modern star systems. One of the researchers, Professor Hans Kalb, hypothesized that perhaps the complex is oriented toward a celestial sphere that is no longer visible. That is, stars that have disappeared from Earth's field of view due to precession, or unknown objects that existed before the cataclysm that erased them from observation. This sounds speculative, but circumstantial evidence supports the version. Several sections of the stonework have preserved symbols that, when superimposed on a geographic grid, resemble celestial coordinates. They are repeated, but do not point to actual objects, perhaps to hypothetical ones. Another theory is that the object was created during a period when the map of the sky was different, and that the creators may have recorded orientations that no longer exist in the conventional sense. Perhaps the landmarks were not stars, but moving light sources. This would explain the shift, but it also raises more questions. If the landmarks have disappeared, why? If the object repeats something that no longer exists, where does the knowledge come from? How could people who had no optics, no measurements, no writing, create such a precise design based on a vanished sky? Traditionalists return to the error version. Perhaps observers misinterpreted the world around them. Perhaps everything was a coincidence. But in a system where every wall is oriented to the minute, this seems unlikely. Today, the observatory remains untouched. None of the landmarks match those used in astronomy, and this is its main feature. This is not a miscalculation. This is a different calculation, one in which the sky may have been arranged differently. The manuscript that names no people, no time, no gods. In 1912, in a monastery library in southern Bohemia, antiquarian Wilfrid Voynich acquired a parchment manuscript that immediately stood out from the rest. It looked like it had about 200 pages, each covered in elegant but incomprehensible handwriting. Between the lines are drawings, plants, circles, figures, graphs, not a single word, not a single signature, not a date, only letters that do not belong to any known alphabet. Later, the manuscript received the name of its buyer, the Voynich manuscript. For a century, cryptographers, historians, linguists, and botanists have studied it. None of the attempts to read the text have been successful. The alphabet is unique. No symbol is repeated exactly. The grammatical structure suggests rules, but the meaning of these rules is unknown. The manuscript is divided into several conventional sections: botanical, with images of plants that do not exist in nature; astronomical, with circular diagrams that do not coincide with known maps of the sky; biological, with anatomical images not tied to any culture; prescription, with texts similar to descriptions, but not containing numbers or names. Each section is systematic. No chaos. Only neatness, repetition, as if someone wrote slowly, observing the sequence. The paper is high quality. The ink is durable. The drawings are confident. This is not a draft. This is a work completed in form, but not in understanding. Radiocarbon analysis determined the date of the parchment's creation, 1404-1438. That is, the 15th century. But no European language of that period contains elements similar to the text of the manuscript. Neither Latin, nor Greek, nor Middle High German, nor Church Slavonic. Cryptographers tried to crack the text. Algorithms, statistics, frequency analysis methods were used. Some structures did indicate the existence of grammar. There were words that repeated, there were endings, there were forms corresponding to declensions, but there was no key. The main thing is that the manuscript does not contain a single name, a single date, or mention of a deity. No character, no historical event, no point of reference to the world in which it was created. It is a system without an author. One hypothesis claims that the manuscript is a forgery, a clever forgery created in later times. But analysis has shown that the ink matches the era. The writing style is developed, not imitated. And most importantly, to create a forgery so complex without purpose, meaning, or orientation, and without inserting a single recognizable element seems like a pointless effort. Proponents of another version believe that the text may be written in a fictitious language, created perhaps for a ritual or as part of an esoteric system. But rituals are usually accompanied by names, gods, spirits, numbers, images. Here, nothing, only things, plants, shapes, shapes, shapes. Some suggest thinking differently. Perhaps the manuscript should not be understood linearly. Perhaps it is a description of a world in which the logic we are accustomed to does not exist. A world in which there are no personalities, only phenomena, no time, only cycles, no faith, only consistency. One of the modern researchers, Professor Gibbs, suggested that the text was written for a different form of perception, not for reading with the eyes, but for working with the text in a different way, through hearing, movement, tactility. But it is impossible to prove this. All that is there are pages and the text that does not let you in. The manuscript has been studied from top to bottom. Scans are available. Research continues. But with each new decade, it becomes clearer. Perhaps there will be no solution. Not because it is impossible, but because we do not know what form the question should take. This is not a story without an end. It is a system that has no beginning. It does not require an explanation. It simply does not refer to anything, as if it was created not to transmit, but to exist, quietly, complexly, without us. The village that ate its own shadow. In the central part of Nepal, on the slope of the Mahabharat range, there is a place that the locals call Ruro. This word is not translated directly, but its meaning is close to the concept of the other side of the world, or inner twilight. There are no settlements, no infrastructure, just trails through the forest and rocky outcrops. But on old topographic maps, dating back to the late 19th century, there was a village in the area. It had a name, a shape, a population. There was a school, rice columns, a temple. It was called Tapirijan. There are references to it in administrative documents from the British colonial period. The 1883 census indicates the population at about 140 people. In the 1912 reports, there are already 60. In 1937, there are 17, and after that, nothing. Not a disaster, not an epidemic, not a migration, just a disappearance. The last entry is a postal note. Letter not delivered, addressee unknown. The date is 1941. Modern satellite images show only forest in the area, no traces of roads, no stone structures, no remains of a field. Even according to satellite data, the soil is untouched, as if the settlement never existed. But there are maps, and they match. In 2010, a group of researchers decided to find at least traces, a foundation, a well, a cult site. After a week of searching, they came to a clearing where the soil was looser. They made a test pit. At a depth of 1 meter, they found a fragment of ceramics, simple fired clay, standard for the early 20th century. But nearby, nothing, no coal, no organic matter, no debris, one thing, isolated. One of the expedition members, who was conducting a magnetometric study, noticed an anomaly. In an area of approximately 30 by 30 meters, the device showed zero response. Not attenuation, not interference, no signal at all, like there's nothing reflecting in that area. No clay, no metal, no density, like the area of land isn't responding. The researchers left the area 2 days later. The reason was an unexpected malfunction of the equipment. The navigators switched off. The cameras recorded blank frames. The electronic compasses froze. All this without explanation. The temperature, pressure, humidity within normal limits. Locals are reluctant to talk about this place. In local mythology, there is an image of a shadow that no longer wants to return. This is not death, not destruction, but a decision not to be observed. Some believe that the isolated villagers gradually moved away. Maybe they went to other regions. Maybe they disappeared into neighboring villages. But if so, why does no one remember a single name? A single old man from there? a single family connected to that place. Others believe that Tapirigen was never a village in the usual sense, that it was a space of action, not a settlement. A ritual zone, perhaps. A place where a form of isolation, not physical but conceptual, was practiced. Some ethnographers have suggested that the inhabitants had a worldview in which the goal was disappearance. Not escape, but withdrawal from observable reality. The assertion that the village ate its shadow is, in this sense, not a metaphor, but a statement. The inhabitants destroyed the connection between themselves and the reflection. This is confirmed by the fact that in old photographs of that region, taken by random travelers, the village is always in the shadow, even in the daytime, even in bright sunlight. The stone buildings are barely distinguishable. They are dimmer than the rest. It's hard to put into words, but perhaps that's the point. The village hasn't disappeared. It's just become invisible, as if its matrix has turned inward, as if presence is no longer important. The researchers stopped working in 2014. The reason was the lack of new finds. The form of disappearance was total. Today there is only grass in the place of Tapirigen, not a single visible trace, not a memorial plaque, not a road, only forest, only silence, and sometimes the wind, which suddenly stops when you walk along the coordinates where, according to the maps, the central street was. Some say that when you stand there, you feel that something was there, not visible, not audible, but on the edge of sensation. This is not just how settlements disappear. This is how forms of memory disappear, not forgotten, but voluntarily removed from the observable. The shipwreck with no ship, no sea, no crew. In 1965, in a desert part of Namibia, on the border of sand dunes and a rocky plateau, geologists discovered a cluster of metallic elements. The region was known as a zone of active uranium and rare earth mining, and the initial assumption was that the object was of man-made origin, the remains of old exploration equipment, possibly from the Second World War. But upon closer inspection it became clear the metal was older, significantly. The object was a plot of land about 40 by 15 meters in area, partially strewn with oxidized iron and brass joints. Along the contours were the remains of fasteners, rivets, and rounded sections of corner beams. Visually, it's the outline of a hull, not a building, but a ship. The outline repeated the shape of the vessel, an elongated oval hull, tapering towards the stern, the remains of fragments resembling the fastening of masts or partitions. All the elements were deformed, badly damaged by time and corrosion, but the main thing was that they lay in the desert, more than 100 kilometers from the coast. The nearest sea is the Atlantic Ocean. The landscape between the fine zone and the coast is dunes, cliffs, plains. No rivers, no traces of oxbow lakes, no geological signs that the sea ever reached this level. Geological history shows that the region has been stable for the last 8,000 years. So the big questions were simple. If it's a ship's hull, how did it get here? If it's not a ship, why does its shape absolutely match naval architectural standards? And if it's not a hull, why is there a clear outline that matches the entire internal logic of shipbuilding? Some suggested that these were fragments of ground equipment that had accidentally formed into a familiar image. But an inspection of all the elements showed the thickness of the metal, the bends, the type of alloys. Everything corresponds to shipbuilding of the late 18th, early 19th centuries. Particular attention was drawn to a fragment on which a number was preserved. Corrosion had almost erased it, but under the angle of illumination, it was possible to record the marking, with the date 1847 and the signature C.77. None of the known ship registers, British, Portuguese, French, contain a corresponding number. There were no bones nearby, no animals, no humans, no clothes, no traces of wood, just metal and sand. It has been hypothesized that the hull was brought here in parts, as part of an engineering project, perhaps a temporary shelter. But then there should have been foundations, fortifications, traces of a foundation. There is none of that. Apart from metal, there is nothing, no signs, no name, no transportation technology. According to magnetic data, the site exhibits a stable field, slightly elevated relative to the surrounding area. This indicates the presence of parts of the structure hidden under a layer of sand. Perhaps there is another part of the frame below. But no government agency has sanctioned the excavations. The reason is the lack of clear historical or strategic value. Today, the object is partially buried, only lines, like a contour on the ground, like the ghost of a ship that no one remembers. Not in the maritime registers, not in the archives. This is not a local legend. No one from the region has ever spoken of a sea reaching the plateau, not in oral tradition, not in drawings. This is not a repetition, not a myth, only a form without a source. And in this form is the whole mystery, because it reproduces the principle of the construction that could not be built here, could not be left here, and could not be forgotten here. The world that was buried beneath a symbol. In the Chincha Plateau in central Peru, far from the known routes and tourist trails, a small research expedition was launched in 2007. A group of archaeologists from Lima were engaged in digital archiving of geoglyphs that had not previously been officially catalogued. Among the expected straight lines, circles, and triangles characteristic of the region, there was one object that immediately raised questions. It wasn't the biggest, it wasn't the most complex, but the shape was dramatically different. It was a symbol, one, without symmetry, without repetition, without decorative load. It looked like the intersection of three angles in different directions, a simple but geometrically unstable figure. It's about 90 meters long. The surface is a burnt gravel crust just like the Nazca Plateau, but here there are no other lines nearby, just one. The satellite image showed that the shape is perfectly aligned with magnetic south, not geographic south. This is unusual. Most ancient buildings and drawings are oriented to the sun, stars, and terrain. Here the landmark is hidden. Archaeologists conducted a soil analysis. Below the gravel layer, at a depth of just over a meter, a stone covered in coal was discovered. Cleaning showed that the same figure was engraved on it, only smaller. It was as if the geoglyph had been scaled down from the original. What was interesting was not the symbol itself, but what was underneath it. At a depth of about 2 meters, a plane made of stone was discovered. Rectangular, flat, about 5 by 8 meters. The surface is polished, the corners are preserved. The central part is a barely noticeable depression. At first it was taken for the base of an altar, but further down, under the layers, there was a structure going down. Stone steps framed by rubble. A rectangular passage. The descent is steep, about 10 meters. The walls are hand-laid. Below is a hall. Low, stone, vaulted, without decoration, without niches. In the center is an empty pedestal. Around, nothing. No inscriptions, no objects, no ceramics, no bones, just walls. And silence. The hall was shaped like a crypt, but without a burial. Not a tomb, not a temple. Just a space located directly under the symbol. The scan showed that the hall is not the only one. There are several more chambers underground. Some are connected, others are isolated. The geometry of their arrangement repeats the structure of the symbol above, but not in a straight line, but in layers, as if the symbol is not a sign, but a scheme for distributing space. On one of the lower levels, the walls were covered with a thin groove, reminiscent of a cipher. Not writing, not a language, but a rhythm. Repetitions and pauses. Not lines, impulses, as if the groove conveys not a text, but a tempo. Not a single symbol has been read. There are no analogs, not in Peru, not in Mesoamerica, not in the Andes. The locals called this place Piedra Quirada, the stone that cannot be explained. They did not worship it. They did not use it. They only walked around it, not because they were afraid, but because, as they said, everything has already happened there. The question of why they built an underground structure with no access, no functions, no trace of ritual remains open. But more importantly, why was all this buried strictly under a symbol that is only visible from the air? One hypothesis is that the symbol was not artificial. It may have been a mark that appeared as a result of geological processes. But then why is it duplicated on the stone underneath? Another version is that the symbol was a mark, an address, not necessarily for a person. And then the question arises, if it is an address, then for whom? And if it is a diagram, then for what? Archaeologists are inclined to believe that we have a model before us, a storage system, perhaps memory, perhaps knowledge, but in a form to which we have no key, and perhaps it should not exist. The chambers themselves are not meant to be inhabited. They have no ventilation. They are too small for ritual, but they are built, and they were not built by the wind, not by the elements, by a human hand, with precision, with design, with effort. Whatever it is not meant to be participatory, only to be recorded, and maybe that is its main point, not to explain, but to be. In the last few hours, we have been through 25 stories. None of them gave a final answer. That was the idea, not to tell what happened, but to show where we stop, where knowledge stops working and what remains only presence begins. Each of these mysteries had a form, stone, sound, geometric. But the meaning is not fixed. It is either lost or never existed in the form we are accustomed to. Not all riddles have a solution. Some are built not to be understood, but to be. History is most often associated with linearity, civilizations replacing each other, architectures passing from era to era. But behind this logic, there remain points where development did not occur, where something appeared and disappeared, where someone knew too little to explain and too much to leave. We don't always understand what we've found, and that doesn't make the find any less real. Everything we've seen isn't fiction. These are materials recorded by instruments, maps, coordinates, observations, facts for which we don't yet have a language. Perhaps the meaning of these stories is not in the objects themselves, but in how we relate to them. When knowledge refuses to be read, we learn to pay attention, not to the solution, but to the very existence of the trace. It is not necessary to understand. Sometimes it is enough to record it was, and it still remains. The world does not need to be explained. Its optionality is part of its reality. We do not lose control when we do not know something. We are simply back at the point where we can look and say nothing. Perhaps these riddles are not a call and not a test, just a reminder that under the layer, beyond the line, underground, there was also, and maybe there still is.